5 index card for your test. That should go, a long way to helping you guys remember stuff. You can use both sides, whatever you put on it. Don't forget that you can also type on it if you want to get that small handwriting out, get that small handwriting ready, or that typing small typeface ready, and that way you can be prepared as you can for this test. So, are there any individual questions from you guys? Sorry, my dog's over there if you hear his chain rattling. So, any questions? And if we don't get too many, what I can do is kind of do a quick, just once through a bunch of the stuff that you guys should be looking at and thinking of for the test tomorrow. All right, so let me do that. Since there doesn't seem to be many questions, I'm going to get some kind of short PowerPoints up that I've prepared for the standards anyway, and we'll kind of run through that stuff, right? So let's kind of go back in time here for a second, and let's talk about the exploration and that kind of stuff. That's going to be kind of the beginning of what could possibly be on your guys' test. Remember, it's going to be the 3 chapters that we've covered, which is basically the movement into the Americas, the early Native American groups, that kind of stuff. Also the exploration and colonization, followed by the American Revolutionary Era, which is the French and Indian War and the whole lead up to that. And then the American Revolution itself. And lastly, we'll be talking about the early kind of America after the Revolution and leading into the Constitutional Convention and the Constitution itself. So remember, right, the reasons for exploration, all of that kind of stuff. Don't forget to talk about that. Don't forget to think about that going into your test for tomorrow. So let's kind of run through that, right? The advances in technology are going to be kind of one of the big things that's going to drive that exploration. That whole God, gold, and glory aspect is going to be, really important as well. The trade routes had been closed off by the Ottoman Turks when they had sacked Constantinople, and all the different countries are going to have different motivations for sure. So those big advances in technology, right? These are just a few: that rudder, the lateen sail, the caravel, that's not listed here, the astrolabe and the compass, and those kind of things are all going to be instruments that are going to allow these explorers to be able to settle and basically explore around and to find these new areas, right? Portugal is going to have these economic reasons for settling, right? For them, mostly setting trading posts. They're going to be engaging in the slave trade. You're going to have this whole Prince Henry the Navigator. He's the guy who sets up that trading school. You have Bartolome Diaz and Vasco da Gama, who are the guys that are kind of working their way around the exploration of Africa. You get the triangular trade. Don't forget this, which is also the the Columbian exchange. The test is on the first 3 chapters, so this is a cumulative, unit assessment. So keep that in mind, Nathan. So anyway, you get the triangular trade, right? The triangular trade, you kind of it's really just representing the 3 different points. You have the South America, the Caribbean, you have North America here, and then Africa or Europe. It's really just kind of indicating the 3 different ways that this stuff could happen, right? So you're going to get basically slaves over to America, the raw goods from the American colonies back to Europe, where they're going to manufacture things, and they're going to bring that down to Africa and rinse and repeat, right? So Spain is really going to be an economic motivated country. You got the gold, God, and glory kind of concept again. They're looking for precious metals. They're going to be also, one of the things is this religious aspect of it, right? They're going to be converting Native Americans through mission work, and you're going to have the whole legacy of it, right? All these explorers are looking to make a name for themselves, right? So the Spanish exploration is really going to get kicked off with Columbus, obviously, his discovery, in quotes there, of the New World. And it's going to really open the door, for the further exploration of the New World, right? It's bolded there, so that's some vocab, that you could be using. Over to the Old World, right? The Columbian exchange, the other explorers that we talked about, Magellan, right? Remember him? Magellan being the one that kind of circumnavigates the globe. You have Balboa, who's the first one across Panama. You have Ponce de Leon, who looks through Florida, and that kind of stuff. So the Columbian exchange, right? These are the different goods that are going from the old world to the new and new world to the old, vice versa. I'm not going to necessarily read them all to you guys, but you'd be familiar with some of these for sure. The big thing, right, from the old world to the new is these diseases, right? These diseases are going to wipe out a large part of the Native American population, and that's going to be really, really important and big, and you shouldn't forget that, right? So you have different groups in Central, South American cultures. These Native American groups that were here first. You have the Olmecs, the Maya, the Aztec, the Incas. The Olmecs are kind of this original first major civilization in Mesoamerica. The Mayans are going to kind of come next, and they're going to be this group that pops up. They're going to excel in agriculture, architecture, pottery, calendar making, mathematics. And this culture is going to carry on all the way to the conquest. They're going to be in Mexico, the lowlands around on the Yucatan Peninsula. Do I have a map of? I don't think I have a map. The Yucatan Peninsula is the piece that juts out of Mexico right here. I know it's you can't really see it that great there. Okay, so the Spanish colonies, right? Ultimately, when the Spanish come and conquer the Aztecs, the Aztecs were this big, huge group, the 15 million people or so in modern Mexico. They were as advanced as you get for this part of the world. Advanced technologies. You're going to have the capital Tenochtitlan. Don't forget about Hernan Cortez, who's the conqueror of the Aztecs. The Incas as well. They are probably the largest empire in the Americas before the actual contact with Europeans. They're going to be located down in South America, sorry. And they had adapted to live in the Andes Mountains, and they were conquered by Francisco Pizarro of Spain, right? So you get these Spanish colonies now developing in the area that they had just conquered in Mexico and in South America. This culture is going to spread out from these initial conquests, right? You're going to get the encomienda system, which is basically this idea, where you have setting up of basically districts of these Spaniards that are ultimately going to be taking these areas and basically charged with basically helping these Native Americans. But these Native Americans, it's changing their religion. It's kind of on some level, it becomes sort of slavery, right? And you're going to get these different layers of the encomienda system and of Spanish culture. The Spaniards being the highest, who were born in Spain. The next were the Creoles, and you can see the list right there. And you can also watch the previous review videos to get a little more information if you need to. So then you have France, right? France is going to be the big fur traders. It's all mostly economic. They had been explored by Jacques Cartier and Samuel de Champlain up in Canada. Basically on this map right here, I'm going to zoom in. The French kind of worked their way down the St. Lawrence River, down into Quebec and Montreal, and ultimately worked their way down, as you can see, down all the way to Louisiana, right? They spread all the way down to there. It's mostly a low population, and again, mostly for fur trade related, and it's really harsh weather there, right? And that's going to kind of prevent what's going on, right? Prevent any real major growth. And they'd established relationships with the Native Americans that they saw there, in particular the group known as the Huron. So then you get the Dutch, and the Dutch, remember, the Dutch set up New York initially as New Amsterdam, and that's going to be ultimately taken control of by England and become New York later on. That's kind of what you need to know there. England obviously is going to be now the next big people coming over, right? It's going to be economic opportunity, mostly farming and things like that. You have these joint stock companies that get the initial push into North America, and then you're going to get the religious aspect of it too, the religious freedom, escaping their persecution in England, right? So these first colonies, you get Roanoke, which being the first attempt, right? You got this map down here. Where Roanoke is, kind of on the Barrier Islands in North Carolina, and this is going to be also established by these joint stock companies, and you're going to get Jamestown being the first English colony, right? And you should note the difference between the first English colony and the first European major, colony is going to be St. Augustine down in Florida, and that's going to be Spanish, right? So remember the difference between those. That's something that could definitely pop up on your test. So Jamestown, right? It comes from the Virginia Company of London. It's a joint stock company, and these people are all going to have come over, and they're all looking for land, right? They're all looking for money, and they're trying to get rich fast. and basically they get there and they don't do the work they need to in order to survive long term, because they're hoping to get rich and get out real quick. So they run into issues, right? And there are going to be issues with Native Americans. You're going to get this thing that's called a starving time, where they're just not going to ultimately be doing particularly well, and they're all going to be starving. You get cannibalism. You get people eating cats and dogs and rats and things like that, whatever they can get their hands on. So John Smith being this guy who introduced this whole need to work for food rule, which is going to be obviously pretty important, as it kind of helps keep them going until you get John Rolfe, who basically introduces this tobacco into the Jamestown colony, which is going to be the thing that allows it to actually be profitable and grow and expand finally, until Jamestown grows all the way into Virginia, right? And the expansion is going to lead to the need of government, and you're going to get what's called the House of Burgesses, right? And the House of Burgesses is the first legislative assembly in the New World. That's going to be something that could definitely pop up, okay? They make laws. They're encouraging growth. It's the first elected assembly, right? And it's going to turn into the modern-day Virginia Assembly, and you should keep that in mind too, okay? So ultimately, this charter is going to become revoked by the king when you get issues with Native Americans, and the king basically says that they're not able to take care of themselves. It's going to become a royal colony, and basically people that had backed the king in the basically English Civil War, and the squabbling that they had going on, these cavaliers or nobles that had basically received these large land grants from the king, and they're going to basically be given free land in this new area, right? So you're going to also get the Africans introduced into Virginia, and it's going to kind of slowly become what the slave trade, really, to help with the plantations and these large-scale agriculture that exists down in the South, right? So, Africans, I kind of just went over this, right? They were thought of as also indentured servants, right? But you have people coming over as indentured servants, where they serve these 5 or 7 year terms, essentially, or more, depending on the contract that they actually agree to, in order for them to get their passage paid for over to the New World, right? Additionally, you're going to get people that are just looking to get out into free land, right? And you're going to get this head right system, promising free land for bringing people over to Virginia. Even indentured servants, the more indentured servants and the more people you bring over, the more land you will get. All right, and you're going to get, these basically poor English farmers looking to settle, make a better life for themselves, and you're going to settle in the Shenandoah and Western Virginia areas. Okay, so these are going to be artisans and small self-sufficient farmers. Artisans, of course, being people that kind of trade and create things, right? So the next is going to be the religious colonies, right? You're going to have Plymouth. Plymouth being the first colony. It's going to be these pilgrims, right? These separatists that had left England to avoid persecution by the Anglican Church. Excuse me, sorry. And they had left the persecuted by the Anglican Church in England, the Church of England. And they sought to worship exactly how they wanted to, right? So they're going to basically come over to the New World to do just that. And they're going to basically have this Mayflower Compact, right? And the Mayflower Compact is this kind of first direct democracy that you're going to see in the New World. And that's going to be something that's really important to highlight too. So Mayflower Compact, direct democracy. Remember that, right? And it's these settlers that are agreeing, all together, this social contract kind of idea, establishing the rules for the colony, regulations for the colony, right? So that is going to then, start to thrive a little bit, but ultimately it's going to be kind of swallowed up by this larger Massachusetts Bay colony, right? So these Puritans are going to be these next group. They are separate initially, right? Keep that in mind. They're going to basically also leave England to worship freely and avoid persecution, again, by the Church of England, and this is going to be led by this man named John Winthrop, who's going to become the governor of Massachusetts Bay, and he is going to kind of push this idea of a covenant community, right, based around these religious principles, and they are going to be relatively intolerant of other religious ideas. And it's funny, contradictory, because they're leaving because they want to worship how they want, but any other religious ideas that are kind of going away from their own ideas, then they look down upon that, right? And they're going to kind of, again, have this direct democracy idea through town meetings that had been, the groundwork had been laid by the Mayflower Compact, right? Okay, so that's kind of the end of that point right there. We're going to kind of build on that now in a second. So any questions about that kind of initial bit before I kind of open up the next one here and keep rolling? Sorry, give me 1 second. All right, so now that we're kind of going into the next one here, you've got the New England colonies, right? So we're going to talk about the actual English colonies now, right? And the difference between kind of the colonies of the different nations, which we just kind of talked about, and now we're going to kind of strictly talk about the English colonies again, just as a quick recap, running through this stuff, right? So you have the New England colonies, the northern colonies, whatever you want to call them, and these are going to be Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New Hampshire, right? You can see them right here. This is Maine. This is actually a little labeled wrong. This is Maine and New Hampshire. Sorry, Maine and Massachusetts are essentially going to be kind of one right there. This is basically part of what modern day New York and Vermont. And then ultimately you're going to have Rhode Island and Massachusetts right here. And then you're going to have New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware right here, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Okay, so let's talk about the New England colonies, right? As we were just kind of talking about before, they were these small, tight-knit religious communities. They believed in that covenant community, the religious beliefs influencing the whole community structure, right? They were led by John Winthrop as the governor of Massachusetts, and he's going to kind of deliver this important city upon a hill sermon, as this kind of Christian example to the world, and they're going to experience direct democracy through the town hall meetings, which you were just kind of talking about, right? So you are going to have what are known as dissenters, and you need to know this for sure. These dissenters are people that basically get kicked out of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And you're going to have Rhode Island and these Providence plantations basically being formed by two people known, in particular Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson. And they're going to both kind of form their own colonies after being exiled, after disrupting the Puritan way of life, because they were spreading new and dangerous ideas in this area, right? So Roger Williams founds Providence, and Hutchinson founds Portsmouth, and they're going to come together to found and become Rhode Island, okay? So the northern colonies, right, they were based mostly on this small-scale subsistence farming, but they also had industries based around fishing and whaling. Logging was going to be this other big one, tons and tons of timber, especially because the farming, was nowhere near as largely profitable as it would be down south. So with the logging, you're going to have these ports that are going to be really good for shipbuilding and building ships, and aided by this Puritan work ethic, this pure, religious-oriented group. Basically, we're hard-working people, and it's going to affect these people and their industries and how well they do economically. So the middle colonies, right now, going down the list, you're going to have New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. So, right, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, where my mouse is. Right, so you can see New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware. I hope you all know where those are. So the middle colonies were home to multiple different types of religious groups. You're going to get a kind of a mixing of cultures more in the middle than anywhere else at the moment. And generally, the middle colonies are going to be religiously tolerant. Now, you're going to have what are known as Huguenots and Jewish people in New York. Presbyterians are going to settle around in New Jersey. William Penn and the Quakers are going to settle in Pennsylvania. Remember, the Quakers were this group that had left England mostly as a result of their beliefs and also being persecuted, and William Penn is going to kind of be the leader of that. So they were much more flexible in their social structures because of that mixing of the groups, right? So the middle colonies, right, what they are going to be based upon mostly is trade. These skilled artisans and entrepreneurs are going to be building these industries. You're also going to have small-scale farming and shipbuilding as well, so there's some overlap there. The farms are definitely better in the middle colonies than they are in the northern colonies. They can just produce more and better crops. The soil is just better for farming. New York and Philadelphia as cities are going to grow as these major seaports and commercial centers, so you should be aware of that. So moving down to the south here, I think we're moving along pretty well to get this done in a pretty reasonable amount of time, considering how much we're covering. So sorry if I am going quickly. If you have any questions, again, please don't be afraid to put them into the chat. Okay? So going into the southern colonies now, right? You're going to have Maryland, you have Virginia, you have North Carolina, you have South Carolina, and you have Georgia. Okay? So, the southern colonies are going to really be based more around status and ownership of land, right? The social structure is going to be based around those particular things. You're going to have these large landowners, right, in these eastern lowlands of the area, right? Eastern lowlands, right? As you get farther west, as you guys know, you're going to head into the mountains, the Appalachian Mountains, and the Appalachian Mountains get pretty large in North Carolina and down into Georgia and Tennessee kind of area over here. They're pretty big, so this rugged landscape, and it's hard for people to live there, right? But this area is kind of gradually going out to the coast, is really, really good fertile land, and that's going to become really, really productive, and that's where these plantations are going to pop up, right? So these large landowners are going to dominate the government and social structure of society, right? The Southerners are going to actually kind of maintain an allegiance to the Anglican Church, and as a result, these are people that the British are actually going to look towards, and hoping that they're going to be more loyal come the American Revolution, and hope that they're going to be able to help them once the war starts. And they have these closer ties to Britain and the other areas of the colonies, right? So these coastal lowlands, you have these large-scale plantations where they're growing these big cash crops, the big three, and you should know this, right? Tobacco, rice, and indigo. Ultimately, cotton is going to become the big cash crop down in the South later, after the creation of the cotton gin, but we'll be talking more about that later. The backcountry, as we were kind of just talking about, that map where the Appalachian Mountains are, right? The farms cannot be nearly as big, so there's people that go out there, they clear their own land, they're able to small scale farming, hunting, whatever they can do to kind of get by, trading with their neighbors. They're a lot more self-sufficient, and these people are going to be these Scots-Irish and English descent as well, okay? So, indentured servitude and slavery, right? So the plantation-based agriculture required a cheap labor on a large scale, right? You have all this land, and you need to be able to pick it, right? So it starts off with indentured servants, right? And these poor people from England and Scotland or Ireland who agreed to work for a period of time for the passage from Europe or relief from their debts. But the big thing is it's going to become slavery, right? And over time, they're going to move away from this indentured servitude, and more of these enslaved Africans are going to be brought over to the southern colonies through the Middle Passage, which is just simply a word, the vocab word to describe the difference between the area between Africa and Europe, and basically the way over to the Caribbean or America. So this is going to become a major conflict point, right? That's going to lead to the Civil War later on, and we're going to be talking just few minutes about the kind of the debate between this and the compromises that need to be made for the Constitution in order for this to even happen. So you're also going to get the Great Awakening. That's going to be kind of the last kind of piece of this one anyway. And I don't know how many questions about this are going to show up, but basically, just as a quick recap, because it's only one slide, it's this kind of religious revival that's going to sweep through both Europe and the colonies during the mid-1700s. You're going to have this rapid growth of different groups of Christianity, in particular the Methodist and Baptist, and it's going to challenge the established religious and government order. And this is also going to kind of help lay one of these social foundations for kind of the difference, of the American Revolution, because many of these people are going to be kind of pulling away from the Anglican Church and such, and it just kind of further separating themselves from England. Okay, so that's the end of that one. Any questions about that before I keep rolling on here? I think, again, we're moving at a pretty rapid pace, so we're covering quite a bit of ground. All right, going into our next standard, which is the Revolution itself. So, okay, so as you can see here, this is a map of kind of really right around 1750 or so of what the country and what the continent, North American continent, looked like, right? You had the Spanish creeping up from the south, and this is what's known as the Spanish borderlands. You have the French that had worked their way down. Actually, I'm going to make this bigger, sorry. The French that had worked their way down the St. Lawrence River and into the Great Lakes area where they caught up to the Mississippi River and down into Louisiana. You have the English colonies over here, and you're also going to have, this is the land that's going to be just given over to England in a particular treaty, but those are the big three, okay? So you're going to, as a result, right, of the proximity, As the French expand eastward over here and the English expand westward over here, you're going to kind of get this borderline, right? And this borderline is going to become this area of contention between the different groups, right? And the area of contention is going to lead to conflict between the different groups, and you're going to get what's known as the French and Indian War, which is really just a part of a larger conflict that is known as the 7 Years' War, which is essentially this kind of, it's really a large global scale conflict between many of the different European powers, right? And it's going to all start off in western Pennsylvania with George Washington, actually. So you're going to have initial British failures and defeats in western Pennsylvania. We've talked about that stuff pretty extensively in class, but basically these initial failures of the war, the French are going to basically wipe the floor with the British initially. And it's going to cause the British to kind of reprioritize the war in North America, and under a man named William Pitt, they are actually going to kind of reorganize and ultimately defeat the French in North America, and this big culminating battle at Quebec, and it's going to ultimately push the French out of their territory in North America. So what you're going to get at the end of that, once the war is over, the British are going to look for a way to actually be able to regain the money that they had lost in the war, right? To repay the money that they had, or to regain the money that they had spent on this war. And they're going to start to put new taxes on the colonists, right? And the first one's going to be on sugar. You're going to get the Sugar Act, and it's going to cause a large-scale, protests in the colonies. You're going to get the Stamp Act, which is going to be the next one. On legal documents, you're going to get tea, have taxes on tea as well. So these are, big things that you should be aware of, as far as the taxes go, for sure. Don't forget the Proclamation line of 1763. So basically, once this war was over, and you have the Treaty of Paris that ends the French and Indian War, the British are going to basically say, sorry folks, you cannot go into the new land that we had just gained from France. And the reason why they did that was because of issues with over here, in particular with Native Americans, in particular a man named Pontiac. That's going to lead a kind of rebellion and lead Native American tribes against the British, and they're not going to want to have to deal with basically helping these the British, and basically they don't want to have to protect the British, so they basically just draw a line down the crest of the Appalachian Mountains and say you can't go farther west than that. This angers the colonists obviously quite a bit, because they frankly fought a war and they are pissed off about it that they can't do it. So all these issues that you're running into end up leading to the Boston Massacre, right? And the Boston Massacre happens in 1770 on March 5th. We watched the John Adams segment, and ultimately you get 5 colonists dead. It becomes this huge propaganda piece. You have this bloody massacre, right? You have this piece of propaganda over here, which shows the British basically firing on unarmed crowds over here, but we know, today that this isn't really quite what happened. You have, American protesters that were instigating and goading the British, and there's a lot more to it. You have snowballs being thrown. Arguably the colonists actually started beating them with clubs and things like that, before any firing actually took place. So the Americans aren't quite that innocent. But this term bloody massacre gets shot all the way around the colonies, and it's going to lead to people being even more pissed off and frustrated, right? So you're going to get more and more protesting, and you're also going to get the Boston Tea Party kind of going against the Tea Act. And this is going to kind of have American colonists dumping tea into the harbor. It's going to basically force the English to kind of do something, and they pass what's called the Intolerable Acts. And the Intolerable Acts are going to basically really, really go against the colonists, and it's going to basically punish them for what they did, right? So we're on the home stretch here, guys. Probably another 15 minutes tops. So you get the First Continental Congress called, right? And many of them are going to kind of come together, the colonies, and basically figure out how to handle this, and basically debate and handle the situation that's going on, right? All of the colonies are going to go, but they're going to decide to boycott British goods. As this is kind of progressing, you're going to actually have an assault by the British on Lexington and Concord, which is where much of the Massachusetts militia was keeping their military supplies. They're going to be warned by Paul Revere and other friends, and basically you're going to have the Minutemen turning out to stop the British advance, and that's what's gonna happen, right? And you're gonna have this shot heard around the world when a battle erupts out in Lexington. You know, it's unknown who actually shoots first. If you have a question, whoever la 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 is, if you have a question, please ask it. But basically, this shot heard around the world is this kind of first kind of shooting of this American Revolution. The other thing, what is... Sorry, just catching up here on the question. While we wait for that, I'm going to keep going here. So anyway, the British push toward Concord right after this kind of first initial squabbling, and they find the supply depot emptied, the arsenal they were going to kind of take. On their way back, more fighting breaks out with more and more American militia that showed up now, and they're going to basically forced to retreat back to Boston under fire, and the British are going to take a shellacking here, and the war for American independence is really going to begin here. So you're going to have three different types of colonists you should be aware of, right? You have patriots, people who believe in complete independence from Great Britain. You have loyalists or Tories, the people that are going to remain loyal to Britain because of cultural and economic ties. And then also people that are just neutral, and you be aware that most people at the start of this are just simply neutral. Only about 30% or so of Americans are actually people that believe in independence and are willing to start this war. But once that ball gets rolling, obviously it starts gaining momentum pretty quick. Right, and all these people were influenced by the Enlightenment, right? And the Enlightenment was this period of time during the 17th and 18th centuries, which saw development in new ideas, scientific and philosophical, that are going to be the big things that are influencing the American independence, right? And these are the rights of the people and the relationship that they have to their rulers. So the big philosopher that you should be familiar with is John Locke. He is going to influence the American belief in self-government more than really any of the other Enlightenment thinkers. So I go back to Lexington real fast. So basically, whoever la 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 is, what's going on is that with all of the British in Boston, what's going to happen is that they get wind of these protesters and these people having a large supply of weaponry out further into Massachusetts at Concord, basically. So they don't want those falling into the hands of people that were being dissident, people that were going against them. So basically, what they do is they go to try to seize those weapons, and they get stopped by Americans, and when they do, there's going to be firing that erupts, and it's going to become known as the shot heard around the world, because it's going to start this whole huge global conflict. I wouldn't say you need to know too many dates, Eric. The big things would be probably Jamestown in 1607. You should obviously be familiar with 1776 with the Declaration of Independence. 1787 is the 1787 is the Constitution. 1763 is the Treaty of Paris that ends the French and Indian War. But other than that, I wouldn't say there's too many dates you should be aware of. Okay, so moving on here, right? So John Locke in particular, his ideas about sovereignty, right, and the rights of the people, and these ideas are radical at the time, right? This goes against everything that had been happening in these main forms of government for really a long period of time here, and they're going to kind of challenge these centuries-old practice, throughout the world, of the dictatorial rules by the kings, emperors, and other chieftains and things like that, right? And he's going to believe that all people are free and equal and have these things called natural rights, which is bold here, right? These natural rights that John Locke talks about are life, liberty, and property, and these things are the things that basically these rulers cannot take away from the people, and that ultimately government should be like a social contract with the people, and that government gets the power from the consent of the governed to protect their rights. This is huge. Goes completely against the established order. And in return, people are promised, to obey these laws. That's what the social contract is, right? Government's going to protect these people, and these rules are all things that are established by the people. And this is the big one. This is what they act on, right? If government doesn't act in the best interest of the people, then it's the people's right to overthrow the government. That's what they do, right? So additionally, you have this man named Thomas Paine who establishes and writes this thing called common sense. So AJ, we haven't gotten there quite yet, so I'm going to leave that for another about maybe about 5 minutes or so or less. So Thomas Paine is this guy who writes this pamphlet known as Common Sense, right? And he challenges the rule of American colonies by the England, right? And he basically argues for American independence. And this thing's going to spread like wildfire all the way around the colonies. It's going to contribute to the growing sentiment for independence. It's going to be all these different things, why America should ultimately be independent. So, Declaration of Independence is going to draw on these things, right? In particular, John Locke and Thomas Paine, as well as the other Enlightenment thinkers. It's going to be written by Thomas Jefferson. Know that. Live it, right? Thomas Jefferson, he's Virginian. It's probably going to show up on your test. It's probably very much so could show up on your SOL down later on in the year. So he writes these things, right? Big quotes. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's where he's talking about natural rights, right? That to secure these rights, government are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed, right? This whole idea that the power of government comes from the people, the consent of the governed, right? That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and their happiness. So if government acts against the established social contract, right, then the people have the right to overthrow it. And this is within reason, right? So keep that in mind. It's just not simple little things. So this is not a light matter to overthrow a government, for sure, right? So, additionally, you're going to get the grievances that laid out to the King George, basically the reasons for this breakup, right? Think of the Declaration of Independence like this giant breakup letter to the king, right? So these grievances, these things that upset the Americans are going to be the taxation without representation, the quartering of troops, closing off the port of Boston, and the Intolerable Acts. The king basically flat out ignoring him, and there's tons more in there, and many of these grievances are going to coincide with what was written in Common Sense by Thomas Paine. Okay, keeping going. You're going to have the war. So I know we're going really fast. I'm trying to keep this all under an hour definitely. We're probably only another 10 minutes or so. Maybe a little bit more. So George Washington, right? He's chosen as the leader of the Continental Army, right? His leadership is going to be responsible for keeping this army together throughout the ups and downs of the war. In particular, he's going to kind of take over the war up in Boston, and he's going to actually cause the retreat of the British up in Boston with his efforts. He's going to retreat from Brooklyn and New York City about a year later, once the British kind of come back and basically invade New York City. He's going to kind of retreat all the way across New Jersey, and then basically after getting whooped, going to establish himself and win two major battles at Trenton and Princeton. Trenton would be the big one you should know about there, for sure, right? So later on, a year or so later, you're going to get the big turning point of the war at Saratoga, New York, right? And Saratoga, New York is going to be this point where they actually capture an entire army of one of the big generals of the British, and it's going to basically convince France that this is the cause, worth fighting for them, and they're going to actually, more so than just monetary, covert monetary support, they're going to actually externally now join the war on the side of the Americans. They're going to push military, economic, resources into the war, as well as officers and generals and things like that. And as this war is going to drag on, this is important to note that the British are going to begin to lose their popular support for the war, right? So ultimately, once this is going on, basically Ben Franklin is the person, right? And this should show up too. Ben Franklin is going to negotiate the Treaty of Alliance with France, and that's the thing that we just talked about that's going to provide that monetary support and military support through the Army and Navy. So as things kind of start to wrap up a little bit more in the north, the British are going to kind of retreat down to the south, where they're hoping that that loyalist group that we were talking about before is going to really be able to help them, right? So the British are going to basically push the war, into the south. It's going to be a brutal campaign on both sides, but basically the British are going to get caught. They're going to kind of have this resupply, they're hoping, at Yorktown, Virginia. They're resupplying the coast, but they're going to be captured here against basically the American army, and by sea the French are going to show up with their navy as well, and they're going to cut them off, and Cornwallis is going to be forced to surrender with his army. And while the British probably could have kept fighting, there were still troops, in the field that were able to fight. Another general with another big army. But basically, the popular support had ended in England, and this was the end of the war, of the armed fighting and conflicts. So that ends in 1781. It takes a couple years to actually sign the Treaty of Paris, and the Treaty of Paris is now basically going to lay the boundaries. That on the western boundary, they're going to take all the way to the Mississippi River, the Americans. Spain is going to actually get Florida back, kind of dealing with the French. You're going to get this northern border at Canada, and such. And the big thing is that Britain is going to recognize the United States as its own nation. Okay, so we are in the home stretch. That's kind of a mouthful, I know, and we are in the last one right here. So, let me bring this up to here, right? So you have the Articles of Confederation, right? This is going to be kind of the end of the war, and it's going to basically lay this groundwork and framework for a government, established for the United States. And this is going to kind of put most of the power into the states, right? And the reason why they do this is that the leaders are fearful of a strong, powerful central government because of their experiences that they were just having with England, right? England had a strong central authority, so they wanted to kind of get away from that, right? And they do. And the Articles of Confederation, some of the big things about it, right, is that it provides that weak national government on purpose, but this is going to become a major weakness of it. Additionally, Congress is not going to be able to tax or regulate commerce amongst the states. Not being able to tax is a problem for a government because you can't afford things, you can't do things, you have no money, right? There was no common national currency, so this caused confusion between the different states. Each state had one vote. In order to get anything passed, you need to get 9 out of 13 of the states to agree, and we know how hard that could be. In order to change any existing laws, you need to get all 13 to agree to it. So this was really tough, and really not a great first attempt at a government here. There was no executive, so there was no major president that had executive power, seriously executive power anyway, or judicial branch, national judicial branch. It's going to lead us to Shays' Rebellion. In Shays' Rebellion, there was this kind of period of depression after the American Revolution, where the depression hits these farmers that had acquired debt to meet the demand for war goods, right? And the war ends, and the prices of these farmers goods drop because they're no longer in demand, and the states who are in debt are looking to actually to get out of debt, so they start to collect more taxes, and when the farmers can't pay, they start to go and seize farms, and that's going to lead you to Daniel Shays, right? And Daniel Shays is going to gather up a number of his buddies out in western Massachusetts. These are war vets who are really upset about the way that things are going, and they're going to basically rebel against their government, just like they were told they should if it's not meeting their interests, right? And they're going to go and attack these courthouses and prevent farm seizures and things like that. And it is going to really expose the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, because it's going to be difficulty by the nation in Massachusetts for suppressing this rebellion. Right? So ultimately they do get suppressed, and the wealthy and the elite of the country start to worry about these type of things, and any more of these kind of things, if something gets really out of hand, it could really go against their own interests, right? So they call this Constitutional Convention, and the idea initially is to basically adapt and kind of reform the Articles of Confederation, or at least change them in a way that would be meaningfully be able to help and suppress these type of things, but they ultimately start to just draft a whole new constitution, right? And this happens in Philadelphia in 1787, and George Washington is going to be chosen as the president of the convention. He's going to preside over it, although he seldomly participates in the debate. His presence is going to just give this convention credibility with everyone, because he is still this kind of larger-than-life figure, right? So you also have James Madison. James Madison is going to be known as the father of the Constitution, and you should know this for sure about both of these, right? Both Virginians. So Virginia's going to find it important. It means Mr. McNabb and I are going to find it important, right? So Madison is the father of the Constitution. Washington is the president of the convention. So Madison, being this political philosopher, he has basically led, these debates, but he also kept copious notes and things like that. A lot of notes, in particular, and that's one of the reasons why we know about what went on in these debates. So you're going to get two different plans emerge out of the debating. One's kind of the New Jersey plan, right? The small states plan. The New Jersey plan is going to call for equal representation per state, right? They want every state to be equal as far as representation in the legislature would be. Virginia, who's much larger, they are going to disagree. This is going to be authored by Madison, so that's important, obviously, too, since he's a Virginian. And basically, he's going to propose 3 different branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. And he's going to propose that the representation be based on state population, right? And that state population is going to be, that's why these large states want that, because that means they'll have more representation in Congress, which means the laws that get passed will represent their interests. So New Jersey's opposed to that, obviously, because having so few people in comparison, they wouldn't be able to get anything passed that are going to be beneficial to them. That's why they want all states to be equal, right? So you get a compromise, the Connecticut Compromise, also known as the Great Compromise. And basically, this is going to combine these plans for the most part, and you're going to basically get the 3 different branches of government we were just talking about, but also you're going to get basically 2 House legislature, what's called bicameral, okay? And the first one is the Senate, right? And the Senate is going to basically be 2 people per state are going to be the representatives, right? And then you're going to also have the House of Representatives, and the House of Representatives are going to be based on population. So this is kind of meant to appease both different groups here, right? So now that you have this decided, and that some representations will be based off population, the South now is going to demand that basically slaves are going to count as population, since slaves make about 40% of their 40% of their population. So the South said basically that if we don't get this, we're not going to actually ratify the Constitution, and since you need 9 out of the 13 states to actually ratify the Constitution for it to go into effect, they basically hold it hostage, right? So you get this 3/5 compromise. The North doesn't want slaves counting as population, so what they agree on is that every 5 slaves, 3 are going to count toward population for representation in the House of Representatives, and also for taxation purposes. We are at the home stretch. So you're going to now get the Constitution, right? And the Constitution is going to basically be this federal law of the land, right? It's going to limit the federal government really to the powers that are listed in the document, right? And that if not mentioned in the Constitution, the states are going to basically be given those rights by what's going to become the 10th Amendment to the Bill of Rights in the Constitution, right? So the Constitution creates 3 equal branches of government, and the idea is that they're going to basically balance. It was called federalism, right? Federalism is the balance of national power and state power, okay? So that the states will basically be equal to the amount of power of the federal government, and you're going to basically have different sides and different groups arguing, how much power each group should have, but we'll get there in a second, right? So you have the branches of government that get created, right? You have the executive branch, which is there to execute the law, to make sure the law is followed. You have the legislative branch, which is creating the laws, right? And you have the judicial branch, which is interpreting the laws. And the judicial branch is going to become really important when you get judicial review established a bit later with Marbury versus Madison, which we're going to be talking about next unit. Okay? Anyway, they're going to basically aim to avoid too powerful of a central government. You're going to have these checks and balances. And checks and balances are going to basically be ways for each of these different branches of government to be able to not allow the other person to get too much more in power. And the big classic example of that is basically the executive branch. Let's start from the scratch, right? The legislative branch creates a law. The executive branch has to sign that law into effect. If they do, it becomes a law. If they don't, which is the check on the judicial branch's power, it's called vetoing. The president can veto, right? And when the president vetoes, ultimately, the judicial branch has to vote on it again. And if they get more people, they actually have to get 2/3 majority now to pass instead. The thing can become a law anyway. And the check on all of that is that the judicial branch has the ability to interpret the law and basically say if it is constitutional or not. And if it's not constitutional, then strike it down completely. And the way the executive branch checks the judicial branch is that they actually appoint they nominate the judges, and the legislative branch, the Senate in particular, actually affirms those judges, which is where we're stuck at right now in our Supreme Court, trying to get our next justice with Merrick Garland, who had been nominated, and it's being held hostage in the Senate. Anyway, the documents that influence the American Bill of Rights are going to be the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which is written by George Mason. You should know these two, right? All the Virginia stuff you for sure should be aware of. So they reiterate the notion that basic human rights should not be violated by governments and establish basic human rights for Virginians. Okay? The next influence is going to be the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, and this is Thomas Jefferson, and it's basically outlawing the practice of government support for one particular favored church. It's kind of starting the separation of church and state. Okay, and the bill, basically James Madison is going to kind of take both of these documents. It's going to influence him when he writes the Bill of Rights. Okay, and he combines these ideas. And the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. If you're not familiar with them, you should. Basic things like the right to free speech, press, assembly, all of that kind of stuff, religion. The right to bear arms is number 2. You're going to have, a number of the right, no search and seizure. You can't have troops. They can't force you to have troops in your house. A number of them. And the 10th, is ultimately that anything that's not listed in the Constitution, the rights or powers are reserved directly to the states. Okay, so the last 2 slides here are the Federalists, right? And you have the Federalists. The Federalists are the group that basically advocate the importance for strong central government, and they are promoting the economic development and public improvements. These people, many of these people are basically George Washington is a Federalist. You're going to have James Madison actually being a Federalist at the time, and Alexander Hamilton is going to be another big one. And this is going to basically be pushed. This whole ratification for the Constitution is going to be pushed by these Federalists, right? And ultimately, they're going to write a number of these Federalist papers are going to be written by John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and Madison. Arguing for the ratification of the Constitution. And then you have the opposing group, right, the Anti-Federalists, and thank you for those that have stayed with me this long. I know it's been a long ordeal here, but it's a lot of information. So the Anti-Federalists basically fear the overpowerful central government, right, and they feel that it could be destructive of the rights of individuals and the prerogatives of the states, and therefore they are the ones that call explicitly for needing a Bill of Rights in the Constitution. This is kind of that last compromise. Okay, we will ratify this as long as we're going to get a Bill of Rights. It's going to secure the rights of the individual, right? And that's kind of it. So I thank you all for fighting the good fight and staying this long. It's been a long time, I know. So thank you. Are there any last questions before we call the stream to a close tonight? So we give it about 20 more seconds here for anyone to come up with any last minute ideas. And if not, I'm closing the stream. So thank you guys, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your evening and good luck studying for your test. If you have any questions, you can come in before class, obviously, and I can kind of help you out. So on that note, have a good night, guys, and we'll see you either tomorrow or Tuesday.